Was the sun created twice? How old is the earth? Are we really just stardust? And when were the angels created? That's just a few questions we're going to answer today as we begin our new series, Journey Through Genesis.
Lazarus! Come forth!
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now, sometimes the Hebrew word for create is all-inclusive, but in this case, we know that it's not because we have context as we're going to continue reading, particularly in the next verse. Isaiah 45:18 summarizes the creation week. For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He hath established it, he created it not in vain, he formed it to be inhabited. So here we can see the various stages of creation: create, form, made, and establish. And as we look to verse 2, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. So what happened? God created the earth, and now it's without form and void. I find it interesting in reading the 1599 Geneva Bible's commentary, and it gives commentary on this verse 2. It says that it was as a rude lump and without any creature in it, for the waters covered all. So this was the state of the earth after it was created, but before it was formed. The Hebrew word for formed means to form or to give purpose. And we see that the earth is without form and void. It has no purpose. It only exists. And so by analyzing the word was, the earth was without form and void, we can see that that is one of the interpretations of the Hebrew word hayah, which means, I can't help but think of the karate chop, hayah, every time I see that word. But it means to become or to exist. It has quite a few different meanings, but it's used 21 times in the first chapter alone of Genesis. It's used many times. And so we can see how to interpret it just looking in Genesis chapter 1 alone. The very next verse, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Let there be hayah, light, and there hayah was light. It's the same word. And so if we look and we see the same use of the word all through the Bible, not just chapter 1. So where would you put the gap? If you're going to put a gap in verse 2, then why there only and nowhere else in the whole Bible? We just take it for what it says. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, because nothing had been formed and nothing had been made. And the word darkness, the Hebrew word for darkness, is H2822 in the Strong's. And if we look at Isaiah 45:7, it says, "I, the Lord, form the light and create darkness." So that's the same Hebrew word for darkness. And we know that God is light. He didn't have to create light. He is light, but he formed the light in verse 3. And he surrounds himself in darkness. I suppose that if he hadn't created any darkness, then we wouldn't be able to sleep at night because it would never be dark. And we know that the darkness that he later calls very good in verse 31, everything that he made was very good. And darkness gives rest to the earth, and it's very nice at night when you want to sleep to have a little bit of darkness. It comes in quite handy. And God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And we always say to your kids, good night. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And I always believed and have heard many times that there's some thin layer up in the atmosphere was the firmament. But he said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters and divide the waters from the waters. And he divided the waters under the firmament from the waters above the firmament. It's interesting, if you do a little research, how much water is in the atmosphere, or the troposphere, which is the first heaven, which God indeed called the firmament heaven. And there's 37.5 million billion gallons of water in the atmosphere in the form of water vapor. That's a lot of water. So the firmament is not a thin layer. It is from the ground all the way up to the tropopause, actually, or to the stratosphere, is the first heaven, and that is the first firmament, which he called heaven. So it's a very thick layer. This is, of course, where we live, where we have our weather, where the birds fly, the planes fly, the mountains extend. Earth has he given to the children of men, but heavens is the Lord's. In verse 9, and God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. As we look back to verse 2, this would have been quite devastating to mankind and all the animals if they were here while God was forming the earth. It would be a very dangerous place to be. And so God couldn't have created man and all the animals before he had a place to put them. So it's clear there's no gap in between verse 1 and verse 2. You just read it just as you see it. Nothing has been formed and nothing has been made. So it's only been created. It just existed. Had no purpose, no life, no form. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass. And so God brought forth the vegetation, and we'll talk about that later in the next series. But the grass began to grow and the vegetation began to grow. It was not a mature creation except in the Garden of Eden, and we'll get to that in our next series. And in verse 14, God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. It's interesting diagnosing this verse. The lights were for signs, for seasons, for days, and for years, and also to give light upon the earth. He put the light in the heavens. So the sun was already emitting light, but now we have all these other sources of light. And he put these in the heavens to give light on the earth, and it was so. So God basically established the connection of the light from the sun to the stars and then back to the earth, and then said it was so. So there's no billions of light years to wait here. God establishes that connection, as we read it again, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven. So there's already light up there. The sun is already emitting light. And now he's saying, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, to be signs, seasons, days, and for years. And then he adds, to give light upon the earth, and it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. So the sun was already here because that's the way we calculate time. And in the beginning, that's when time began. And it is calculated by our relationship to the sun. The sun was already here, it was just evening. And then he formed the light that the sun emits in verse 3. And then he made. there we have the description that was given to us in Isaiah 45 and 18. Created, made, formed, made, and then established, which means that to go the distance. Now, the chapters and the verses were put in the Bible, added to the Bible in the 1560 Geneva Bible. There were no chapter numbers and verse numbers before. So I find it interesting, finishing our reading here in verse 16. He said, God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And some of these words in the English language have been added for reading. When you look at it in the Hebrew, it's kind of interesting. He made the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. And then it mentions the stars and said, and he set them in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth and to rule over the day and over the night and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And it's interesting, there's many times where it uses stars and angels interchangeably in the Bible. There's many verses that talks about stars and angels interchangeably. And it says in quite a few different verses, their place is in heaven, speaking of the angels. And in Hebrews 1:14, it says that all angels are ministering spirits sent to minister to those who will inherit salvation. Now we know there's seraphim and cherubim and living creatures and things that are talked about in the Bible that are surrounding the throne of God that are up in the third heaven. Not the second heaven, but the third heaven, and we don't know when they were created. They're serving God and around the throne day and night. And so that is separate from the angels that are ministering spirits. And in Genesis chapter 2, verse 1, it says, now the heavens and the earth are finished and all the host of them. The word host says mass of persons, many, many people. An army. And so it's talking about the host of heaven and earth. And I think the inference there is that indeed they were created in the week of creation. After all, they were in heaven. And how could you put them in the second heaven, where heaven, their place is in heaven, it says over and over again in the Bible, until you've created heaven. How can you put them in heaven when there is no second heaven to put the angels in? And when Satan fell, he said that he would set his throne above the stars of God. And since they were created on day 4, how could he have fallen and set his throne above the stars of God before they were even here? I think there's a lot of information that suggests, particularly in the wording of, I think it's verse 17 and 18 of Genesis chapter 1, that the angels were indeed created during the week of creation. In fact, it says that everything that God made was very good. And it said that Lucifer was perfect from the day that he was created until iniquity was found in him. So I think there's a lot of evidence that suggests they were indeed created specifically to minister to man, and they were created in the week of creation, probably on day 4. But I don't think I can just nail that down and say, 100%, that's exactly what happened. But I think that's where this all the evidence suggests. Then on day 5, God created the fish and the birds. And then day 6, he created the animals and man. I use that word created very loosely. He formed and made because he created on day 1, and then he formed, and then he made. And he may have done some creating afterwards, but we know from Isaiah 45:18 that this is a process that took place over a week's time. Creating, forming, and you can't form anything that doesn't exist. And you can't make something that has no form. For example, if you had molten steel, you couldn't make anything out of it until you first formed something and you gave it a purpose. And that's what the Hebrew word form means, to give it a purpose. And then you can make something out of it. And it's interesting, he formed man of the dust of the earth. For dust we are, and to dust we shall return. So I believe that we were right there in the dirt with the seeds and everything else, waiting for God to command us to come forth and to form us from the dust. And then he made man in his own image. And then he established man when he created Eve. Because Adam by himself, even if he ate of the fruit of the tree of life, would have been a very lonely critter unless God had made somebody else. And he did, he made Eve. And so by making Eve, he established mankind, that they would continue on, that they would multiply, that they could endure time and multiply and continue, just like the sun and everything else it was established so that it would continue and go the duration that God has desired for it to. So I hope that has answered a few questions maybe that you've had. I know there's a lot of other theories out there, and I wanted to present what God's Word says to me, and even what our reformers had to say about a few of these things before the evolution theory came along. This was pretty much the belief that they held, that there was no gap between verse 1 and verse 2. Thank you for watching, and I will continue in verse 2 in our series, hopefully within the next few weeks. I've got a lot of research to do. God bless you. Thanks for watching.